Hello and welcome to my very first YouTube video. I mean, it's more of a presentation, but I think that's okay. So, I hope everyone is safe and fine. I know these are unprecedented times for most of us, and we are nonplussed with what has been going around this year. But I do wish that you and your family stay healthy and get happiness with whatever way that suits you best. I'm Adit Gupta, and today I would like to talk about my journey of masters in philosophy. Uh, Professionally, I'm a product designer, but I have always been attracted to philosophical discussions. So, 2 years back, I decided to study it more formally, and today I will talk about my decision to pursue philosophy from where I studied it and what did I learn in the past 2 years. So, let's get started. So, by the way, philosophy comes from this word philosophia in Greek, which means the love of wisdom. And true to its meaning, pursuing philosophy for me was for the love of wisdom. I like to think, and philosophy does gives you a lot to think about. And the trigger for me was this existential crisis in 2018. I mean, I had so many questions about the purpose of my life. What was I even doing? What makes me happy? But then, what is even happiness? And then it led to further questions like, what is truth? And I kept looking for answers, talking with people, reading books, and I realized that I'm certainly not the first one who had these questions. I mean, people have been asking them for more than 3000 years now. So this led me to study philosophy more deeply. The quest for knowledge, reality, truth, values, and existence. But then you might ask that why do a degree? I mean you can just go through books or do some self study. Well, first of all, I don't have any career ambitions with a degree. I think I'm good with design that way. But then I also want to get published by some well-known publishers, and I thought that a degree will give me some credential to be taken seriously by publishers, and I'm talking about getting published in philosophy here. So yeah, I think that was my one of the major reasons for doing philosophy more formally. Okay, now let's get to the meat of this talk. Like, what did I learn this course, and what are my thoughts about this course? But before that, I'll just briefly cover from where I did it. So I did my masters from Devi Ahilya Vishwavidyalaya in Indore, which is in Madhya Pradesh, and it's one of the state universities. It has a NAC rating of A plus. So NAC gives this rating to different universities across India, based on their facilities, curriculum, pedagogy, and their infrastructure. And Divya Vishwavidyalaya is given an A plus grade. And this master's in philosophy, it's a 2 year course spanning across 4 semesters. The admissions usually begin in October and November, and you certainly, obviously, you need to be have graduation done with your transfer certificate. And I sat as a private student, which meant that I was not regularly attending classes. What I had was a curriculum and the list of resources, and then I can always reach out to professors and lecturers for for any queries. So, what was there in the course? What did I learn, and what are my thoughts? So, when it comes to the curriculum, it essentially consists of like various fields of philosophy. And while not everything is covered, the curriculum is like good enough to get into mainstream philosophy if you take it seriously and devote some good time thinking. So, we have epistemology, which was definitely a new term for me back then when I started the course. And it deals with nature and validity of knowledge, which I understand is a very simplistic one line definition, but and there's a lot more to the field. And then we have metaphysics. When generally people talk about philosophy, most of the time they are referring to some metaphysical idea. And metaphysics essentially deals with the question of ultimate reality. What is reality? How do we understand it? And what is reality made up of? And for most pragmatic folks out there, this will be like some sort of intellectual wool gathering, but honestly, this subject has stuck with me. And it has been very satisfying, intellectually fulfilling, and even euphoric at times to think about all these metaphysical ideas. And then we have ethics. These are the questions related to morals and values. What is right and wrong? How do we even define right, wrong, good, and bad? And like every law and policy out there has some grounding in ethics. So this does make it quite an important subject. And then we have logic, something that you should definitely be good at if you want to make rational, valid arguments. And we will look at it in more detail in the next slide. Now, aesthetics was not covered in the curriculum. Uh, we had two optional subjects, political philosophy and philosophy of religion. And even though I have a lot of interest in political philosophy, I opted for philosophy of religion as the syllabus for political was like not that great. But the best part of this curriculum was that it gives equal emphasis to Indian and Western philosophy. And I think this is sort of unique for Indian universities. I strongly believe that this makes studying philosophy in India like much more richer. You can say I'm biased, but honestly, it's such so much more fulfilling to learn about philosophy from different lenses, from different cultures. So let's get into some details now. I'll not go semester by semester as this will get like too long and perhaps too boring. So let me just give an overview of what I learned in all these subjects. First up is logic. Well, you can't do a lot in philosophy if you're like really bad at logic. I mean, as Timothy Williams said, philosophers analyze things a bit more carefully, a bit more systematically, and a bit more critically. And for this, you do need logic to be good at this sort of analysis. So, in the course, you begin with the basics like what is deductive and inductive logic, what are valid and invalid arguments, and how do you analyze arguments. Some of the topics like paraphrasing arguments and diagramming arguments also helped in design, as rationalizing and critique is pretty much fundamental to my job. I also came to know about different kinds of definitions. Well, something I had no idea about. I mean, for example, stipulative definition is like a symbol assigned to a meaning. So when we say or when we talk about a gravitationally completely collapsed star, well, we have given it a symbolic name called as black hole. So which I think it's easier to kind of convey the idea rather than every time saying like gravitationally completely collapsed star. And then we also have something called as precise sing definitions. And the aim of these definitions is to kind of eliminate any sort of ambiguity. So for an example, let's say I talk about horsepower. Well, it does not make any sense if I say that it's the power generated by a horse. I mean, that's too vague. So precise definition would be something like it's the power needed to raise a weight of 550 pounds by 1 foot. And definitely there are other kinds of definitions too. But the topic which interested me the most was that of logical fallacies. Now, there are different kinds of logical fallacies, and if you know about them, you can get like really good at finding irrationalities. For example, we say that the burning crackers is not good because it leads to pollution and like decreases air quality. But then somebody will come and say that, hey, I mean, you're trying to destroy our culture because we have been doing it since long. It has always been part of our life, so we'll burn crackers. Well, this is where what we have, what we call as a red herring fallacy. The other person is just trying to deviate from the topic and attack something completely different without addressing the point of air quality or environment. And honestly, you can see these fallacies a lot nowadays. So moving on, we have classical logic, wherein we learn about categorical propositions, syllogisms. So like something like all humans are mortal is like an example of a universal proposition. And when we say that all humans are mortal, Socrates is a human and therefore Socrates is a mortal, it becomes a form of syllogisms, more precisely known as the standard form categorical syllogism. And then we also learn about modern logic. I think most of us are somewhat familiar with parts of it, like having specific symbols for conjunction, disjunction, and negation, making truth tables and testing validity with truth tables. And overall, I would say that this was pretty engaging. I had like lots of fun solving classical and modern logic problems. And then we were also introduced to analogical and causal reasoning and like Mill's method of causal analysis. They also form the basis of scientific experimentation and scientific inquiry. So overall, I would say that it was a lot of fun working on logic problems, and I think it's also important to develop your thinking skills, something that's useful even beyond philosophy. So now let's talk about Indian philosophy. Now, honestly, majority of it was new for me, and it was pleasantly surprising to know that there's a long history of philosophy in the Indian subcontinent. Most of us know about Bhagavad Gita and something about the Vedas and like very little about the Upanishads. But Indian philosophy is like much richer, and it does have significant contributions across epistemology, metaphysics, ethics, and logic. It's just that our approach is different from Western philosophy, which is perfectly fine. Now, not many of us know that there are like six schools of Indian philosophy. Yes, you heard it right. We have six schools, and they are like Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Yoga, Vedanta, and Mimamsa, and they believe in the authority of the Vedas. And then we have Buddhist, Jain, Charvak, and Ajavikas that do not believe in the authority of Vedas. And all of these schools have done like significant amount of work in philosophy. So the course begins by getting us into Indian epistemology, and all schools have given their own viewpoints of what is knowledge and how it can be classified. So, for example, some schools believe that we can have knowledge through inference, perception, and testimony, while others believe that you can also have knowledge through comparison and non perception. And all these schools, I mean, they used to debate over it. I mean, they debated over it for centuries. And I mean, we literally had these argument sessions in ancient India where scholars from different schools will defend their philosophical ideas. I mean, that's like so cool. I mean, I wish we had something like it today also, like in a more formal manner. So I also learned about Buddhist philosophy, uh, which is honestly like much more deeper than sermons by Buddha. It's not just about the Four Noble Truths or the Eightfold Path. In fact, there have been numerous Buddhist scholars over centuries who have given some of the most deepest philosophical ideas. In fact, the theory of no self, called as Anatmavad, is so radical that it takes a while to wrap your head around it because it simply says that there is no self. And well, guess what? We are now learning that this theory might be correct based on neuroscience and psychological experiments. And well, it's not just about metaphysics, but Buddhist scholars also made significant contributions in logic and epistemology. Dignaga was like one such scholar in 5th century who did a lot of work in deductive logic and epistemology. I mean, I was like really shocked to know about all this work. It was like opening gates to an altogether new world. And Buddhist philosophy is so rich that we still have like numerous research papers published about it. So for that matter, even Jain philosophy is pretty impressive, although it's not as wide as deep as the Buddhist philosophy. But their theory of Nayavad and Shyadvad, I mean, they have stuck with me ever since I read about them. So just to give you like a brief introduction to it, like Nayavad says that most of us, define things from a single viewpoint as we are limited by our senses and the partial view of the world. And then they go on to describe several single point of views. But the thing is that the wisdom is to realize the limitations of our belief system and then try to see things from multiple perspectives. Now, I do know that currently there are like n number of books out there which talk about the same thing and the belief system. But then here's the thing, right? Jain philosophy talked about it 2,500 years ago in perhaps like much more detail than you would see in any book which is currently out there today. So we also learned about Sankhya philosophy, and honestly, it's a shame that it's not widely known. I mean, it deserves to be understood in much more detail. It's one of the most fascinating Indian philosophies that did contribute a lot in the development of Indian religious thought. Uh, In fact, it has its own evolutionary theory of the universe driven by the duality of Purush and Prakriti, which, by the way, do not mean man in nature. I mean, I think that's the biggest misconception out there, and it's just a literal translation of Purush and Prakriti. But in Sankhya philosophy, Purush is this absolute pure consciousness, while Prakriti is the manifested part consisting of three gunas: Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. And you might have heard about these gunas in Bhagavad Gita, because Bhagavad Gita takes a lot from Sankhya philosophy. And the idea here is that the interaction between Purush and Prakriti leads to creation of further substances and the world. And if this was not so awesome, I think they have something also like much more deeper, I would say, and much more fascinating, which was their theory of causation called as Satkaryavad, uh, which says that effect is already contained in the cause. Now, think about it again. Satkaryavad says that the effect is already contained in the cause. I mean, this will get like Hume fuming about it. And it might seem counterintuitive, but they do make like case for it. Like something just cannot come out of nothing. And well, there are counter arguments to this, and I can go on. But for now, let's move ahead. Now, I also learned about Mimamsa, which was one of the schools of philosophy with more emphasis on rituals. It focused on the ritual aspect of the Vedas, like especially when I'm talking about Purva Mimamsa, and it talks about how to conduct a ritual, why to conduct a ritual, and so on and so forth. But then Yoga Sutra was particularly interesting. It was given by a sage called as Patanjali. Yes, you heard it right. He was a sage and not a brand for Baba Ramdev. And surprisingly, Yoga Sutra is less about asanas and it's more about the control of the mind. I mean, Yoga Sutra talks about Ashtang Yoga, that is like 8 different kinds of yoga, and asana is just one of them, not everything about it. In fact, the second sutra of Yoga Sutra says that yoga is chitta vritti nirodh, which means that yoga is about restraining your fluctuations in consciousness. It's about controlling your mind. And it's kind of sad that it has been reduced to just asanas and some people have commercialized it. I mean, there's a lot of focus, in fact, on meditation, breath, and understanding your consciousness, something that should be talked about a lot more. The curriculum also covered in contemporary Indian philosophy with thinkers like Gandhi, Ramakrishna, Vivekanand, Ambedkar, K.C. Bhattacharya, and M.N. Roy. And to be honest, this was not very philosophically satisfying. I mean, yes, all of them are great thinkers. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt about it. But I think the work of all these great thinkers had like much more like they had like very wide impact on the nation and its people. And well, it's not strictly speaking in terms of philosophy. Well, it was just okay. But then, I mean, yeah, it's always good to know about them and to know about their thoughts. And finally, we come to Advait Vedant. So, Advait Vedant was my specialization. And specialization in the sense that, after 2 semesters, we are given this option to pick your own subjects or pick your own philosophies. And I opted for Advait Vedant. And, so most of us have heard about Advait Vedant and Shankaracharya. However, very few have read extensively about it. It's a beautiful philosophy that's more inclined towards metaphysics, trying to define like what is reality, how it came about, and like where do we stand in it. And Shankaracharya's Advait Vedant takes a lot from Gita and Upanishads, and the core aspect of Advait Vedant or the core theme of Advait Vedant is around Brahman, which is the absolute pure consciousness. Now, when I'm talking about Brahman here, it's not Brahma, the god which we know from the Purans, or it's not about Brahman, like one of the castes in the Indian system, but it's about Brahman, which is pure consciousness. And Advait Vedant says that you are Brahman, Aham Brahmasmi. And you might have heard about Aham Brahmasmi through Sacred Games, and it's like really sad that it became a joke. I mean, but it's such a powerful statement when you say Aham Brahmasmi, because it says that, once you get past your senses and materialistic thoughts and everything else that bounds you in this world, you can attain that pure consciousness. And honestly, for me, Shankaracharya is perhaps the most influential philosopher after Buddha. He interprets Upanishads like none other, and his Brahma Sutra Bhashya is one of the best Indian philosophical work that I've read. I mean, in Brahma Sutra Bhashya, he builds a system, rationalizes it, and then defends it against other competing theories and schools. This is like true philosophy, and it's sad that most of us don't know much about it. But overall, Advait Vedant is an exceptional philosophy, both in terms of extent and depth of work, something that truly enlightens you. Okay, so now we move to Western philosophy. Now, this was not something which was like very new for me. I had been reading Plato, Descartes, Hume, and Kant before I started this course. So yes, it was more of a familiar territory. And the course begins with pre-Socratics and goes on to cover the philosophical works of Plato, like the five dialogues, the allegory of the cave, the divided lines, the forms. And in fact, now we say that in Western philosophy, everything is like a footnote to Plato. And well, that's true. I mean, Plato covered like many diverse topics and so brilliantly that he pops up like every now and then. And I think that will go on forever. And not to forget that Plato's philosophy is in the dialogue form. And it's not like in that academic essay form, which we know today. And I do think that this dialogue form is still the best way to do philosophy. It's much more enjoyable and easier for the reader to appreciate and reflect on it. So from there, we move towards this big debate between rationalism and empiricism. Now, like both of them, form the bulk of early modern philosophy. And the central question was around, is knowledge innate or is it gained through experience? And we had Descartes and Leibniz on the side of rationalism, and Berkeley, Locke, and Hume for empiricism. Hume being the most impressive of the lot with some like really, really good arguments. And I know that I'm describing it like too simply here. There are like volumes written on the subject matter with some great arguments, analogical reasoning, metaphors, and like thought experiments. Now, you know, here is something which I realized that, this way of doing philosophy in the Western world is like different from the way it's done in the Eastern world, and like especially in India. And I think that's fine. I mean, I'm not saying that Indian philosophy is inferior or anything like that. Absolutely not. I mean, the methods are different, the cultures are different, and obviously the objectives are different. It's just that, when you study both of them together, there are some comparisons made, which might not be the right thing to do, but well, it does happen. Uh, so moving ahead between all this debate of rationalism and empiricism, we had the great mighty Kant. And Kant came and said that, hey, I mean, listen, folks, like rationalism is like fine, but misses the point. Empiricism is fine, but it also misses the point. So, let's do it with synthetic a priori. And, that's where he wrote the Critique of Pure Reason, which is like a milestone in Western philosophy. A book that's like not easy to understand, but it's a brilliant, brilliant piece of work. I mean, people are still doing doctorates on it. Now, I'll not go any further into it because, I mean, that's not the intention here. So, moving forward, I also learned about Kant's ethics with the widely known categorical imperatives coming into the picture. I mean, when somebody refers themselves as Kantian, they're mostly referring to categorical imperatives. Then we move towards like contemporary Western philosophy with focus on ethics and metaethics. There are arguments on some ethical issues like what is good, what is right, and what is wrong, and what do we mean when we say something is morally correct or incorrect. And this also involves the language of morality. Are we prescribing something, or are we simply like acting on emotions? And this like gets like really interesting. And then we learned about Russell, Ayer, and Wittgenstein. Now Wittgenstein like being another boss of philosophy who was influential in the Vienna Circle, and he made some remarkable contributions to philosophy. But by the way, like I consider Russell, the man in the picture, as my sorry, as my intellectual granddad. And he has written like copious amounts of philosophy across various topics. His ideas were like pretty advanced for his age, and his whole demeanor is like Yoda. I mean, like somebody who has been wise from the day they were born. and I have all his books that I relish every now and then. So the last two semesters were focused on phenomenology, pragmatism, existentialism, and the philosophy of mind. The existentialist philosophy impressed me a lot. I mean, the whole idea of existence before essence and that human subjectivity is above the objective norms of the society is something that I can relate to. I would highly recommend reading Kierkegaard, though his philosophy is like not so easy to understand. But it really rings a bell as he presents his thoughts through different characters and even through a religious angle. So finally, we come to philosophy of religion, and this was again my specialization. And even though like I'm not a believer, but then I always had keen interest in religion. Now, philosophy of religion takes an analytical, rational approach towards discussing religion. So you go through concept of God, the arguments in favor and against existence of God, why does even evil exist, and then how symbols have played a major role in every religion, and what it even means by human destiny. So this again was like pretty interesting course. So I know this was long, but then the final question is like, was it worth it? I would say totally. I mean, it was intellectually satisfying and stimulating. It opened an altogether new world for me. It opened my thoughts, and in fact, it even helped me in design by making me a good thinker who can rationalize and analyze arguments in a better way. But the biggest thing is that uh, it's like so satisfying. I mean, you are learning about all these thoughts spanning across centuries, and it's like so much stimulating for the mind. So yeah, I think it was totally worth it. So in the end, I would say that if you want to learn about any specific philosophy or any specific philosopher, do let me know in the comments or do reach out on Twitter. And as usual, if you love the video, just kind of like and subscribe so that you will know about any further videos. So let me know what you want me to talk about next. And again, thank you for listening and stay safe. Goodbye.